So what I wanted to move on from there was understanding what key well-being factors are for employees and the common challenges that are faced for individuals in terms of well-being factors. Now, the thing that I want to do when I sort of go through these points is I want you guys to picture an individual called John. He's working a 9 to 5 in a work environment. He's someone who obviously is sitting at his desk, doing his job, and there are certain things that he feels that are affecting his work and the way he's actually producing work and how he's delivering work. Now, the first thing I want you guys to think about is lack of work-life balance. Now, as you can appreciate, John's sitting there on a 9 to 5, he goes back home, he's probably got more work to do, but there isn't really any time for him to turn off and think about other factors, think about other things, maybe concentrate on his hobbies in order for him to feel as if that he's away from work. A lot of us get caught up in our work and then turn off the laptop, and then when we get back home, we're thinking to ourselves, you know what, I've got an email to do, or I need to make a phone call. So for me, I think work-life balance is vitally important, and a lot of employees feel that challenge in terms of managing their well-being. Another thing that I want to mention is managerial support. Now, again, using John as the example, if he's sitting at his desk from a 9 to 5 and he feels as if he hasn't got the tools necessary in order for him to actually fulfill his job in terms of the managerial support and people around him saying, look, you can use these tools or you can do this, then he doesn't feel really capable of doing his job. And that ties into inadequate resources and training. If you have someone who's doing their job, let's just use an accountant as an example. Again, John's an accountant. If he doesn't feel as if he's able to fulfill the job and he doesn't understand how to use certain spreadsheets, or he doesn't understand how to do certain, formulas, etc., if the training and the resources are not available for him, all of these things are going to tie in and the well-being is going to be really badly affected by it. So I think these are some examples of where if we manage these certain things, and if John is able to control his work-life balance, ensure that the managerial support is there for him, and ensure that there is resources and training available, then he will be able to satisfy his role a bit better and feel as if he is in control of his well-being. Now, what I do want you guys to do today is reflect on your own experiences and challenges that you may have while you're at work. How does that look for you? It may not be these specific things that I've spoken about, but think about the things that you may feel as if you may need more support in, or there are certain things that you can do. So with that being said, I think it's very important to recognize these challenges, and similar to what Sue and Georgia said a little bit earlier, self-reflect, understand what is it that you need to do in order to get on top of your well-being. Understand what is it that's missing in your specific job or role, and how can you change that? So it brings me nicely to my second question, really. So what do you do to ensure you have a good work-life balance, and what do you think is the best way to address any challenges being faced with your manager or employer? So for the first part of the question, I'd like to go to Charlotte, and for the second part, I'd like to go to Sue, if that's all right.
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting set of points that you've made there, and a really interesting question, because the way I see balance and the way I think this conversation is going recognises that balance means something different for everyone, right? So you may know people who appear to always be working and always be kind of switched on, and that might be because they really love what they do, but it might also be because for lots of people, work brings a sense of meaning and purpose and great relationships and opportunities for growth and personal development that are beyond a paycheck. And actually, if we consider that work could be more of a positive experience than perhaps we've been sold, then we can perhaps see work and balance it in a different way. Obviously, of course, overworking and working in toxic environments will have a huge impact in terms of people's mental health, well-being and workload. But for me personally, balance isn't necessarily about spending less time at work, but about finding a balance that works for me, where I have high quality work and meaningful and purposeful work that I actually enjoy. And personally, I've been in states of feeling as though I wasn't quite getting the balance right, feeling like I had an unhealthy balance. Sometimes that has been because I've felt consumed by something that I really enjoy doing. Other times that's been because of a feeling of too much pressure. And I found it helpful to recognize the difference between those different states. So I try to be mindful of that difference and recognize what the triggers are in myself. So personally, on a daily level, if I recognize that I'm not getting away from my desk as much, not taking enough breaks, I haven't given myself a proper break for lunch, that's where I feel imbalanced. On a broader level, if I'm not taking my holidays because I feel as though I can't possibly fit that in, or work feels like it's seeping into my personal life, affecting my sleep, I can't quite switch off at the weekends or in the evenings, they for me are my personal signs that I haven't quite got the balance right at that moment in time. Everyone's different situations and triggers will, of course, be different. So recognizing that in me personally, doing that level of self-reflection, I would say, has been the most helpful thing that I've done. What I've also learned is that balance is really contextual. So it might mean something different to you now than it meant for you in the past, or that it will mean for you in the next 5 years. And again, I recognize in myself earlier in my career, I may have put in more hours earlier on because I wanted to impress and I wanted to progress, but that wasn't sustainable and that wasn't something that I would continue to do. That's also something that I was able to do at the time. Many people won't be able to do that at times in our life because of other commitments. The second point that I wanted to make is that clearly balance is about negotiation and collaboration between the various different people in your lives, in your work, and all the different elements that we're balancing and juggling in our lives as well. So I don't know whether people relate to this kind of idea of constantly having so much on. You know, you've got to have a good social life and like interesting hobbies. You've got to be, you know, doing well at your work and financially stable, but not take on too much responsibility, not overwork, like be able to have holidays and own a home, but also, you know, be able to afford to have the boiler refitted, get a contact everyone in your messaging list, keep up all your social connections, but not neglect your home life. Like there's so much that we are constantly kind of negotiating and collaborating with ourselves as kind of whole individuals. And sometimes those elements aren't in our control, and those elements will constantly be changing and shifting in us. And I think that is perfectly kind of normal and natural and expected. But I think it's worth recognizing that those elements are interacting with each other. So if we aren't able to prioritize our physical health, we may see an impact on our mental health and vice versa. If our working schedule doesn't allow us to meet our caring commitments flexibly, that might create a sense of conflict in our working lives. And so I find it helpful to look at myself and individuals holistically and think about all of those different elements that are kind of competing for attention, and recognizing that we don't just drop off our well-being at the door when we start our work every day. We carry that with us, and those elements of our work and our life naturally are on a kind of a delicate balance, but they seep into each other. And a really good example of that happening was for me the other day. We were meeting to discuss this very event, and I had something going on behind the scenes in my personal life that was a huge source of like stress for me in that moment in time. I was very distracted. I couldn't fully concentrate on what I was doing. There could have been a moment where I just needed to drop work in that moment. And luckily, I work with people who would understand that and who would say to me, listen, you've got to do what you need to do here. Work actually isn't that important. And I think I find that really helpful to have that sense of perspective, recognizing that sometimes work isn't the be all and end all. Sometimes work does drop to different places on that list that we're constantly juggling, and that's okay. And sometimes I have a word with myself about that, like, Charlotte, just think about what's most important here. So getting a sense of perspective, I also find helpful for balance. And then the final thing that I would say has completely transformed my way of looking at my work and in terms of balance is to apply a principle known as job crafting, which is about finding small but significant ways to tweak your job to make it a better fit for you. And it's already kind of been mentioned on the event already, but this could be something that enhances your well-being or your sense of work-life balance. It could be to better align your strengths to the work that you do. It could be adjusting your working hours and finding a place, a location, and the times that work best for you. But I would encourage people to think about ways that they could craft their jobs to make them more healthy for them. Some things that I've done in terms of balance are, again, all the things that have been mentioned already in terms of trying to take regular breaks, building those into the day, because I recognize that if I don't build them in, I probably won't do them as much as I know that it's the right thing to do. Making sure I get outside. I try to keep one day a week meeting free, just so I can have focused time that isn't filled with lots of distractions. It's not always possible, but I try my best. Protecting my time where I need it, and sometimes being quite quite firm on my boundaries. There's lots of different things that I find helpful, and I'm sure there's lots of things that people can think about in their own working lives that might be helpful for them. So I just wanted to share some examples from my personal perspective, recognizing that everyone's experience will of course be different.
That's perfect. And just before we come to yourself, Sue, what I would say is, again, I feel like this theme is constant already in this webinar, which is self-reflection, understanding what works best for you, making sure that you have you have to put yourself first fundamentally, because what you said, which was really interesting there, is when you did jump on that preparation call with us guys, your employer was kind enough to say, look, you need to deal with whatever you have got going on before, so don't worry, you need to, they gave you that opportunity to do that. So I think that's really important, but it's great that you have that ability for yourself where they allowed you to do that. So that's brilliant, and I really appreciate you sharing that. So I guess, again, Sue, for yourself, I mean, what do you think the best way is to address any challenges being faced with your manager or employer?
So for me, it's been a while since I've been employed, but luckily for me, because I like to, be the one in charge. For me, it was always about two-way communication. So someone said to me, remember, communication is a two-way thing. I think I used to expect my line manager to be a bit of a mind reader and be able to tell if I was overwhelmed or overworked. And I'm a bit of a workhorse anyway, so I wouldn't shout if I was kind of under a lot of workload. I would just push on and do it no matter what it took. And so people just expected a lot of me and thought that I was very productive. But obviously that's not sustainable for a long period of time. So I remember someone saying to me that communication is a two-way thing. I remember having a one-to-one and just expecting my line manager to understand how I was feeling. And it's crazy really in hindsight, but I think I thought, can't you see that I am literally knackered? But obviously I didn't want to say that because I wanted to be this kind of strong alpha female in a very male-dominated environment. So when it wasn't mentioned, it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, in the sense that I thought, well, I can't look that tired because he hasn't mentioned it, and therefore I'm not that tired, and therefore I'll just carry on until I just burn out even more than I already feel. And then someone said to me, you should just tell them how you feel, and I was like, oh, I don't really want to. And then the moment you kind of say, oh, I'm a bit overworked at the moment, they're like, oh, I wondered how you were doing so much, and you kind of think, oh, well, why didn't you say something? But it's just this kind of taboo which wasn't discussed. And it's, I guess in now being on the other side, I wouldn't challenge any of my staff if they were overworking. I wouldn't think, oh, you've earned loads of money for the clinic this month, what's possibly going wrong with you? You'd just be like, oh, they're great, don't need to worry about them, I'm going to focus on my less productive staff. So it's very easy to kind of think that line managers as this kind of superhuman kind of person that can read your mind and know how you're feeling, and actually they've got their own kind of worries and concerns, and unless you articulate that, I think my main bit of advice for this second part of the question is just to really be open and honest, and hopefully you're in a workforce culture where you're enabled to be open and honest and communicate with your line manager or your peers or your mental health first aider or whoever it might be that you're comfortable going to speak to, and what kind of escalation channels are in place for those. But just to be honest with yourself and be honest, I guess in light of that kind of self-awareness, are you sleeping properly? Are you stressed? Are you getting a good diet? Is your work affecting your life? And just think about that and think what could be done to improve that. And that's then a good way to open up a conversation with your line manager, what you want good to look like and what it's looking like right now, and how you go from one to the other. Everyone loves a solution and not a problem. So I think if you are able to think about that, then it's really great to have some recommendations in place, because they'll want the best for you as well. So if you can come up with some solutions to that, then they'll be more than happy in most cases to see you develop into that and be happier and more engaged in your job.
Yeah, that's perfect, Sue, and I really appreciate you sharing that information again, because despite the fact, as you mentioned before you answered the question, it was a while ago, I think the whole stigma attached to well-being and mental health, etc. Despite the fact we're trying to move it forward, there is still a lot around that where individuals, and if I use my own example, when I used to be an employee myself, I used to feel very reluctant to address anything, because you used to think to yourself, you know, am I supposed to say something? Shall I just hide it? Or, you know, how do I go about it? But for me, I think the hardest thing is to approach your manager or your line manager about it. But it is the most rewarding thing, because if I had personally done it before, then maybe I would have dealt with my personal situation a lot earlier. So I think, to add to what you're adding, you have to be comfortable enough to do it. And fundamentally, I don't know whether you agree, I think from my perspective, if the employer or line manager is not interested, you just say, thank you very much, it's not for me, I'm moving on elsewhere. That's the I know it's very easy to say that, but I think it's very important to bear that in mind, where, you know, the employer needs to take your situation seriously. So yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that.